a pluralistic form of democracy. This didn't happen. Today, what we have is a totally different kind of party system, one which is built on clienteles, that have been bought off, most of them, by the regime. Now, let me again stress the fact that in 2005, the legitimacy of the regime was based essentially on a sharing of power between Hutu and Tutsi. The basic formula was one in which the Tutsi would be represented by 40% of seats in executive and legislative organs, and the Hutu, albeit representing more than half the population, at least 70% of the population, would then get 60% of the seats in the legislative and executive organs. In addition to that, you had two vice presidents, a Hutu and a Tutsi vice president, and the second vice president, now of course, has left the country because he's now in flight, whether he is in Rwanda or in Burundi, he's no longer around. The point, sorry, Brussels.
He's in Brussels.
Is in Brussels.
Yes.
Rafiki.
Yeah, Rafiki. Yeah.
The point that I'm trying to make here is that what you had in 2005 was a reasonably effective power sharing formula. It looked as if it was going to work. The question then is, why is it that it didn't? It didn't essentially because the regime was not able to domesticate or to control or to accommodate the demands of the opposition. Within the opposition, you had some firebrands, you had some radical elements, particularly the FLN, led by Wassau. The FLN is now split into several different subgroups. And Catherine knows a lot more about this than I do. So if you want to know more about the internal splits within the FNL, should be happy to answer your questions. What I would like to stress is that today, the CNDD, FDD is a political machine. Now, a political machine is a political organization built on carrots and sticks, a mixture of inducements and penalties. And today in Burundi, you have a lot more penalties than inducements. You have to remember that Burundi is an extremely poor country. We're not talking about poverty, we're talking about extreme poverty. This is something that you have to remember. And in these circumstances, it is easy to buy off clienteles, to buy off people who are willing to engage themselves in whatever endeavors the regime wants to bring about to come out on top. And today, the CNDD-FDD is a political machine. It is built on three kinds of clienteles. The youth groups are today the most important clientele attached to the CNDD-FDD. The Imbonerakure, those who see far, unlike me, these youth groups are totally committed to the regime. They're ready to engage in violence on behalf of the regime if they have to. And they have done so in the past, and they will probably do so in the future. There's a striking parallel between the youth groups in Burundi today, the Imbonerakure, and the youth groups that was identified with Tutsi rule back in the 60s and 70s, Jeunesse Révolutionnaire Wagasore, who also did the dirty work of the regime when, during the 1972 genocide, an episode that I know well, because at the time I lost a lot of friends. The GRR, as they were called, were actively involved in killing Hutu elements who were suspected of being opponents to the regime. And just as in the 60s and 70s, the GRR were highly politicized and highly supporting of the regime, very much the same sort of phenomenon is in evidence in Burundi. The Imbonerakure are totally committed to supporting the regime. They are not the only one. The police is very much in supporting the regime, is very much in evidence on the ground. The police has committed atrocities on a frightening scale. The army, likewise, is supportive of the regime so far. It hasn't cracked open into a Hutu and Tutsi faction, even though about 50% are Hutu, 50% are Tutsi. Remember, however, that about 5,000 UNISOM troops are recruited from Burundi. The United Nations mission in Somaliland is made up in part of Burundi army men who are, and of course these people know on which side their bread is being buttered. They know that they stand a great deal to lose if they turn against the regime. And again, I'm going back to this basic notion that you have to remember that Burundi is a place where people are starving. The rural sectors are in very bad shape, not only because of the scarcity of land, but because you've had in recent time anything like anywhere from about 300,000 to 500,000 refugees coming in from Tanzania, all eager to recover their lost properties. These were people who were pushed out of their property, their landed property during the 72 genocide and thereafter. And remember again that if you don't own land in Burundi, you starve. I mean, this is as simple as that. If you don't have land, you have no resource to hang on to. So, yeah, the clienteles that are attached to the CNDD-FDD are one, the youth group, second, the police, third, the army. These are really the critically important sectors that have now been domesticated by the regime, brought under heel. I'm totally unable to say whether this seeming stability, this appearance of normality is going to last. What I can say is that the legitimacy of the regime is challenged from within and without. The party is split. Don't think for a moment that the CNDD-FDD is unified, assuming that it ever was. Well, it was fairly unified in the beginning, but today it is ripped asunder by factions. And some of the French would call les ténors du parti, the really important, the heavyweights. Many of them have decided to bolt the party. Many of them are refugees in Rwanda. Others are in Eastern Congo. Others are in Tanzania. I'm coming to that in a moment, because we also have to consider that there are a number of unknowns in the political equation. What makes any kind of prediction about the future extraordinarily problematic. I simply don't have a crystal ball. There's no way that I can predict what's going to happen. But I would like to mention at least three important unknowns that we have to be aware of in trying to formulate any kind of a sensible prediction about what might happen. One has to do with the massive flow of refugees that have left the country. We're talking about, I would say, about 140,000 people. maybe 30,000, maybe 40,000 are now refugees in Rwanda. And how Rwanda is going to deal with these people is, again, another unknown that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. You have, I would say, about 60,000 refugees in Eastern Congo, mostly Hutu, whereas those that are in Rwanda are Tutsi. And you also have, I would say, Catherine, probably you have more reliable figures than I have, about, I would say, offhand, maybe 30,000 in Tanzania, maybe more.
70 maybe.
70,000.
70,000 in Tanzania. Tanzania is the top recipient of refugees, followed by Rwanda. And Uganda is getting some too.
So the question, we now know that refugees are by no means neutral. Refugees can be manipulated, then can engage in alliances, in tactical alliances, short. They have to figure out how to position themselves in an environment which is rapidly changing, which is difficult to pin down. Of course, their immediate priority is survival, and they're going to engage in survival strategy, even if this means shaking hands with the devil. Survival is the key priority. Next to that, of course, is survival through a system of alliance that could improve their chances of returning to the country as rebels, or returning to the country as supporters of the regime, whatever that may be, whatever deal can be made between the refugees and the influences of the regime. Exactly what will Rwanda do is anybody's guess. I think unknown is what Rwanda is going to do, confronted with a very dangerous situation. For the time being, Kagame has a lot in his hands. And incidentally, it's interesting to see that Kagame is doing very well indeed in terms of positioning himself for a third mandate. A group of Rwandan lawmakers have been very supportive of a third term for Kagame, and Kagame is rubbing his hands in glee. He's very happy about that. There's a stark contrast between Burundi and Rwanda from that. And again, I mean, this goes to show not just how clever Kagame is, but how much more resources he has at his disposal to persuade his supporters to support him through thick and thin, which he will. And he really doesn't need much effort to do that. Because whether we like it or not, I think he has a lot of support from among the Hutu population, even though it's difficult to know what percentage. Because Rwanda being what it is, a dictatorship, there's no way they can tell what percentage is behind him or against him. But what I want to stress here is that what will happen in Rwanda will have a direct consequence on the future of Burundi. And remember, I mean, Rwanda has the means to make a difference in one way or another. Today, I get the sense that Kagame is biding his tongue. Kagame is not quite sure what to do. He keeps his wedded finger to the wind. Let's see which way the wind is going to blow. And how am I going to position myself in this very complex environment. So there's another unknown. This has to do with donors and with the regional organizations, the most important of which are the National Conference for the Great Lakes, which is very largely under the thumb of Museveni and Kagame. The African Union has been much more forceful in blowing the whistle on Kagame and in saying that there was no way they could improve third year mandate. Echoes of that have been found among donors. Certainly, the United States has certainly a major stake involved. $14 million are at stake. $14 million of the United States funding, part of which to the army, to the Rwandan army, to the Burundi army, part of which assistance to economic assistance, social assistance. I'm not sure I know exactly what the breakdown is, but if you add up the European Union donors to the United States, you end up with a fairly large amount of money. By that I mean that approximately 50% of the Burundi budget is funded by outside donors. Whether the donors decide to turn off the faucet or keep the flow going is going to make a major difference. So what we have in sum is a situation that is extraordinarily difficult to predict because of these unknowns. My own hunch is that it's going to be business as usual. Nobody wants to rock the boat. I don't think that the donors are prepared to cut off funding. They know that if they do, this is not going to make much of a difference. If they turn off the faucet, Nkurunziza will say, to hell, we need to go ahead, no matter what. This, I may be totally mistaken, and I defer to Catherine, who's been in Burundi recently, and who has certainly a much better feel for the situation than I do. Another reason why I think it's going to be business as usual, and I'm not saying that it's going to be calm. I mean, it's not going to be smooth sailing. There's going to be a lot of losses, human losses, a lot of bloodshed, undoubtedly. And this will start, I think, on the 20th of this month, you know, when Nkurunziza runs for
presidential elections.
Kagame, as I said, doesn't seem to be willing to write the book. I've heard rumors to the effect that he is eagerly awaiting the moment to unleash the refugees into Burundi to somehow bring about a change of regime. Whether this is really seriously being contemplated by Kagame, I really don't know. You know, Burundi is a land of rumors. There are a lot of rumors floating around. And given the fact that you know, getting access to reliable information is so difficult, not that there is a complete blackout of news, but there's certainly very little news that are reliable. And in the absence of news, people tend to spread rumors. And these rumors can be extremely counterproductive, extremely dangerous. Anything can go. So what we have is, I think, a situation of enormous uncertainty, a situation which has the potential for quite a lot of bloodshed, a situation in which donors will be called upon to make very important decisions. Whether they will make the right decisions or the wrong decisions, I'm unable to say. But here then are a few thoughts that I thought I would share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, René. I'd like to ask a couple of questions myself and then open the floor to our audience. Marie, can you tell me if we're actually live streamed?
Yeah.
And has anything come in?
Not yet. No.
Okay, well, Marie Lemarchand will inform me Those of you who would like to pose questions via Twitter, our Twitter handle is MIGS, M-I-G-S, lowercase I, Institute, I-N-S-T-I-T-U-T. MIGS Institute. Well, it was a great airplane, designed by an Armenian. But the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies is known all over the world as MIGS, and we haven't changed it. So, René, you spoke about the importance of the donor contribution to the national income of Burundi, and also, I think, to the president's funds for paying off clients, and satisfying people. And in general, what we hear from Burundi is that many supporters, former supporters of the president, are very disillusioned by the fear that his search for a third term will turn off that tap. And their assessment of his capacity to keep supplying money to them as militants depends largely on that foreign money, that hard currency that comes in. And therefore, we're hearing that even among the youth movement members, there's a great desire to let the world know that even though they're members of the movement, they no longer support him and his bid for a third term. And this appears to be one of the major polarities that's emerging, faction development. Even though they've been loyalists in the past, now they're not so sure they want to remain loyalists because their bread is buttered on the side of access to donor money directly and indirectly. And that poses apparently a real problem for him. So that raises the question then of whether other donors might emerge beyond the European community, etc. I mean, South Africa's position is very clear that it will not support a third term so far. China stands out, in my mind, as one of the most probable substitutes for foreign donor funding. But as we know, China today is facing its own economic crisis, although not on the scale of Burundi. So based on your experience of Burundi, and Catherine, you're with us, it's wonderful. I was thinking even of giving you my seat here, so if you would be comfortable. No? Okay. All right. But if you would like to contribute any of what you think about this, I know René has said earlier he would welcome your input as well. So please don't be shy in that respect. And if there's anybody else here who's recently been in Burundi and in touch with these events, please share your knowledge with us. But René?
Well, I would like to defer to Catherine, who knows a lot more about this than I do, but let me just come up with a couple of ideas here. I think that what's missing is a coordinated approach on the part of donors, the European Union in particular. And I don't see that there is a consensus about what to do. In other words, should we do this or that? If the regime goes ahead, are we going to turn off the faucet? What kind of conditions can we come up with that would be conducive to a change of attitude on the part of the regime? If there is no change of attitude, then what do we do? I mean, you know, there's a dialogue there's got to be a dialogue going on. There should be a dialogue going on, but it's not taking place. So this is what I find to be very worse. The other thing, the same would apply, I think, to regional organizations. And again, Catherine, you know a lot more about this than I do, but I think that there is a certain amount of dissensus among regional organizations.
Let's mention some of them. There's the International Conference on the Great Lakes Region, which is a recent entry into the field. There is the African Union. Catherine, are there any others?
East African Community.
East African Community.
East African Community, which has come out actually against the third term, if I remember correctly.
Well, they are kind of, I mean, there are some countries that have come out against the third term. For example, Kagames has been very clear. Other countries have not been as clear as people would
Within
want them
the
within the East African community,
Okay.
while the African Union has been
That's what I
clear.
didn't know. That's what I didn't
The
know.
But the East
International
African Community
Conference
is really,
on the
split.
Great Lakes region is an organization of many parts, many members, I should say, and they don't all agree. I mean, Sudan is a member, for example, even though we don't often think of Sudan as part of the Great Lakes
It's
region.
been very largely manipulated by Uganda and Rwanda.
Yes and no. Tanzania I was present in 2 meetings of the ICGLR, and I can tell you that
I'll try not to hold it against you.
Tanzania, even at the founding, Tanzania has played a very significant role, and a very positive role by and large, in the ICGLR. And of course, Kenya is well represented, together with Rwanda, etc. I think the real issue is, as you put it very well, what are the alternatives? In other words, if one intervenes as a neighbor, as a friendly neighbor with constructive ideas, then what ideas are constructive and have legs, have a real chance to be implemented without triggering an even worse civil war? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think that we should listen to what Catherine has to say. I really don't have too many constructive thoughts. I think Catherine has a much more solid grasp of the issues. So, Catherine, why don't you share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also relying on. We were just looking at the donor list. I think what you said is very important. That there doesn't seem to be a coordinated approach. But I think for Burundians, what is encouraging is that some donors have come out and said we're going to cut our bilateral aid.
I think European
and there
donors
are some various donors that actually have said if Nkurunziza runs for a 3rd term, we're going to cut out our bilateral aid, and this is going to put extreme economic pressure on the regime.
Right.
And like you've said, this poses a big challenge to the regime.
I think the understanding in Burundi is that the European donors are out. The U.S. is out if he runs for a 3rd term. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Their position is clear. Whether they actually implement it, time will tell. But their public position is on the table. We are cutting off all aid, including U.S. aid to the military, by the way, if in fact he runs for his 3rd term, which he is in the act of doing now.
Plus, they have already implemented cuttings because of the security institutions and the massive crackdown on demonstrations after his announcement.
So all the training and all of the equipment, materials.
That's going to hurt. It's going to hurt.
Yeah.
So that much is coordinated. Beyond that, though, I think that we come to that gray area about, okay, so if he runs, as he really appears he is, so then what do we do? Do we just say, okay, no aid and see more people starve, and more people go into the forest and seek arms, etc., or dig up arms that they buried years ago, and get new supplies of arms, and then the civil war starts. That's one option. Catherine, do you see any other ideas on the table about how to resolve the situation?
I think it's extremely difficult at the moment because the government has been not very engaging in the dialogue that some of the international community has tried to put into place. And so there's been, I mean, for now they've said, well, we were able to dialogue, but we're only going to do it after the presidential elections, which for the opposition does not work because the elections, the presidential elections and his candidacy are at the core of the crisis. So there's a lot of people that actually think that there might not be any peaceful alternatives anymore. And we've heard a lot of reports lately of people that have been going to the bush. There have been attacks last Friday in the north of Burundi and some incursions from Rwanda. And I think a big unknown is the division of the army that has come out after the coup.
After the coup.
And there are a lot of reports of soldiers that have deserted. We don't have the exact numbers.
So Museveni has just been talking to the president. He arrived with his entourage and apparently a cat as well. And can we imagine what he might have said to the president in those discussions? Would he be, for example, here's a scenario, just off the top of our heads, right? So could he have said, all right, so you're going to go ahead with the election, but you have no money after that. So what you need to think about, and what I'm here to tell you is, you will be well treated after you win the election and step down for new elections, and allow a new nomination process within your party, and then the donors will come back as long as the elections are not held under the extreme conditions of the legislative elections. In other words, the media can come back, etc., freely, and you will be guaranteed a golden parachute, so to speak, or a golden handshake. You will. I mean, we hear that the president is very concerned that his method of operating exposes him to criminal prosecution for theft of public funds, for other kinds of corruption, for possible assassination of rivals, etc., and enemies.
Talking about imprudence?
Yes, and that therefore he is very afraid to lose the presidency, because he would lose what he thinks is his immunity from prosecution once he's no longer president. So if he was assured by regional leaders that he would be protected, and even some assurances from foreign donors outside of Africa that he would not be prosecuted if he avoids a civil war by stepping down, and then a new nomination process within all the parties could take place, and a new election under the conditions that were originally anticipated in the Constitution would go forward. Would that be a scenario that might be feasible?
If I can interject
Please.
quickly, I apologize for interjecting.
No.
I think
Far from apologize.
just to
Please go ahead.
just to expand on what would be a good solution.
Yes.
Is, the East African community
Mhm.
right now, as it stands, some countries are against the third term, others are for it, others haven't come out and let their public position come out yet. But if you look at the two meetings that they've had, they haven't gone as far as saying that they're against the third term. If you go back to the history of Burundi, when Buyoya did a coup for the second time, all the neighbors of Burundi gave, they had an embargo on Burundi, and that's what pretty much kicked off the talks. The Arusha Accord, and then they ended up having 10 years of freedom. So I think the last hope is the East African community. If they can come up one way or the other and
RCCDJ of Pacific.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very actually they have a lot of support. And one of the messages that was sent from Kagame was that it was difficult for them to support the rebellion or even the opposition when they were so disorganized.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one problem that we had so far. And there is also a lot of tension in that area because Kikwete from Tanzania was one of the first presidents to come out and say that the third term should not happen.
Yes.
He came to Burundi before the meeting of the
Yes.
and he was actually saying that the Arusha Accords were one of the heritage of Nyerere.
Yes.
And he was saying that there should be no third term. He came out to Burundi, he spoke to the president, he went back. But there is a lot of tension between Tanzania and Rwanda. So when Rwanda took position, Tanzania kind of fell back and didn't speak anymore. So
Yes.
there is a lot of tension in that area between Tanzania and Rwanda. And in EAC you have Uganda, you have Rwanda, and you have Kenya. That's being called the coalition of the willing, who are willing to do something.
Yes.
And Tanzania has kind of fallen back, and they're waiting to see what's going to happen.
Let's specify what Rwanda's interest in this is. If I can just summarize it briefly. I mean, the key issue here is that Rwanda has good reason to fear that Burundi and the DRC may once again become havens for the military opposition to Kagame and infiltrators who would cross borders and once more resume attacks on Rwanda at a much higher level than in the past. And therefore, from President Kagame's point of view, the great danger here is that Tanzania is ambivalent about whether it really wants to stop attacks like that. There's a suspicion of Tanzania complicity with the opposition to President Kagame, and that if chaos emerges in Burundi, then those who want to attack Rwanda would find sanctuary, even more sanctuaries there than in the past. Is that correct?
You're right, because from Uganda and Kenya position, the Burundi issue is a very minor irritant.
Mm-hmm.
But for Tanzania and Rwanda, it's huge. It's big because Rwanda we share a large border for the region.
Yes.
And Rwanda still is at war with the
FDLR.
FDLR.
Yeah, especially with the
Absolutely. And Rwanda's biggest problem with Tanzania is that he has been proven that some of the FDLR, actually the head of the FDLR,
Yes.
were staying in Tanzania for a long time. So Rwanda and Tanzania were afraid that it's going to turn into a proxy war. They're going to use Burundi as he said, Kikwete was the first person who told the president, no third
Don't
term.
do it, no
But
third term.
once he went ahead with it,
Yeah.
Tanzania has been
Quiet. Yes.
And Rwanda was very vocal up until the time they started having meetings of EAC,
Yes.
and all of a sudden Rwanda just completely stopped.
So any settlement to be viable and sustainable must do what the original agreement in 2005 did implicitly, which was to ensure that Burundi did not become a base for attacks on Rwanda. I mean, that's a sine qua non for Rwanda, and we could say for stability in Central Africa.
Well, I think the Rwandans are concerned about the possibility of emergent lines between the refugee population from Burundi and Eastern Congo and the FDLR.
Yes.
I mean, this could due to the fact that a large number of the refugees in Eastern Congo are Hutus.
Yes.
And who are really in good terms, potentially, with the FDLR. There's a real possibility of yet another wave of insurgency emerging in Eastern Congo, abetted, fed by the refugee population.
Yes.
And this would certainly be seen by Rwanda as an extremely dangerous threat on the horizon.
Yes. So when President Kagame calls on the opposition in Burundi to get its act together, he's really saying you absolutely must do that before anybody especially Rwanda, can put any faith in your claims.
He hasn't said that in so many words, but it certainly is a major
I
source
think,
of preoccupation.
yeah, I think so. I think
But
so.
I think the biggest thing that happened in the last 15 years in the region was the Arusha peace accord. If the Arusha peace accords were not as strong as they are, right now we'd be experiencing a lot more bloodshed. Because essentially this conflict is not ethnic. There are Hutus, there are Tutsis, but the conflict it's a conflict of it's constitutional. Like the Constitution says no third term. It's the legitimacy of constitution.
But may I say, there are contradictions within the 2005 agreement from President Nkurunziza's point of view. He needs more patronage to maintain the loyalty of his clients and to survive. Under the agreement, there's a limit on how much patronage he can award to the Hutu allies. So he's seeking to destabilize the Arusha 2005 Accords, perhaps, in order to get more room, more space for patronage within the Hutu sphere.
That's not the best way to get patronage.
Yeah.
Well, he needs to be educated
Destabilize
to the
economy,
fact
not
that
get much
rather than more patronage, as you said, René, rather he'll bring the house down, like Samson,
Yeah.
on his head. But he doesn't seem to grasp that.
The whole opposition to
Yeah,
the third
sure.
mandate.
Perhaps, yes. Perhaps it was already cut by Delilah. Excuse me,
The
Patrick, please.
whole opposition to the third mandate
Yeah.
is not a Hutu or Tutsi thing.
No.
A lot of the people that are against the third mandate
Are within his-
are within the Hutus and the Tutsis.
Yeah.
A lot of the groups that have been killed
Yes,
have been both ethnic groups.
yes.
So if the reason why this fight hasn't come up in ethnic proportions is because of the Arusha peace accord. If you look
It's a
back
very
in the
good
day,
point, yes.
it would have been like we would have been, because if you look at it, it's been going on since third week of April. We're in the almost third week of July. It's been almost 3 months, and we're talking about 100 to 200 people killed in the region. That's like nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
I'm sorry to say this. but
No, we
it's like nothing
understand. That's the
because-
number of people killed at night by bandits.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's a positive thing, and that's something that can be built upon, not something that.
Well, then let me turn your statement into a question to you. So then, how do you explain his enthusiasm for taking down the 2005 agreement? Not just by running for a third term. He's also said, parallel to that the agreement has to be completely redone because it doesn't satisfy his needs. And René was saying that the president has failed to domesticate the opposition, and I think we could also say he's failed to domesticate his own old allies. So why is he so anxious to take down the 2005 agreement?
This is my own
Yes.
views. I think there are some elements within the government, the current government, that think that the 2005 agreement was too generous for one side.
And we better say what that side is.
And we better for the Tutsis.
It-
That's one.
That word is relevant.
Exactly.
Yes.
The reason why I'm saying that is because, but it's not the whole same day. It's elements within same day. Unfortunately, those elements within same day are the ones that have power. We're talking about the elements that are running the police and the intelligence division, or the lack of it anyway,
Yes.
and as well as some of the institutions of the country. But within same day, there are people that want to continue this path.
Yes.
So the only solution that can come up with is that the people within San Jose that want to continue the Arusha peace accord needs to be the ones that come victorious in this fight. So this
Yes.
is not a Hutu-Tutsi thing. It's a governing thing. And
They lost the fight over the nomination for the presidency. And
Well, you know, there's this notion that, and I think that Nkurunziza is dead set on projecting this view of things, that the first round doesn't count because I was elected by joint session of parliament. It's not a popular vote. So it doesn't count. So my aim is not really to bring down the Arusha Accords. I still endorse the Arusha Accords, but my position is that what happened in 2005 is one thing. It doesn't count because I was not elected by the population at large. And so now I'm entitled to a third term, which is really a second term, according to Burundi.
I don't know anybody who buys that as a justification, but
Well, he does.
He does, besides the president.
I mean, and his supporters do as well.
Yes. Yeah. Beyond his circle. So what we're left with is a situation in which
An impasse.
an impasse that has to be broken peacefully, preferably peacefully. This is up to the people in Burundi and their neighbors. Nobody sitting here is in charge of anything. But if it's not broken peacefully, from our viewpoint here, as Professor Lemarchand said so eloquently earlier, the alternative is blood, suffering, death, violence, extreme violence, etc. And those who have the best interests of Burundi and the people of Burundi at heart really need to seriously consider the direction in which they're pushing events and outcomes, I would say. Marie, do we have anything? I'm sorry, I totally missed this. Okay. Please, René, this is for you. Please comment on the huge gap between international and domestic coverage of Burundi. For example, about the framing of the problem. And I'll read the other two questions and I'll go back to them, but let me just put them on the table. What can Museveni do? Can he do anything at all? Third, can you tell us more about the role of militias, youth militias? What are their tactics? And I'm going to add a fourth question to that. These people are called the youth wing, but are they really youth? Are they not much older today than when they were in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and turn of our new century, or I should say the beginning of our new century? I mean, people keep calling them the youth wing, but they're in their 30s and 40s, as best I can tell. And so, unlike the Rwanda situation, where they're really, and back in 72, when they really were youth, I mean, today we're dealing with veterans of civil wars in Burundi. We're dealing with people who've been in the security services as well as having jobs in the youth wing. And that may be a further complication. So the first question is, would you comment on the huge gap between international and domestic coverage of Burundi, for example, about the framing of the problem?
As I said earlier, there is in Burundi today, if not a blackout of news, at least a very deliberate control of news networks. It is extremely difficult for the average Burundi to know what's going on. And the regime is, of course, intent on gagging human rights advocates, journalists. Journalists are very much targeted as potential victims of the regime. There is a lot of rumors going on, and in these conditions, the situation is extremely unstable, unpredictable. Whereas, of course, there's a lot of the international media are not particularly reliable either. I mean, there's a lot of information that we get from the media which has to be taken with a grain of salt. But the gap that the questioner is mentioning is, in fact, this refers to the fact that Burundi is an island of non-communication anyway, compared to what's happening outside the country. The other question about the youth groups, I really don't know enough about the profile of the Imbonerakure to say whether they are, middle-aged former soldiers whether they are essentially youth elements, the sense in which GNL and youth groups. I think that Catherine probably knows more about this than I do. She has a much better sense of the profile of the women than I do. My sense is that they are pretty young, most of them, and they are manipulable, and they are easy to buy off, or at least to hire. to buy off. That's my take on this.
Okay. Catherine, please go ahead.
To develop on this, I think while the Indian are officially created movements
Yes.
of
the party
between 18 and 35, if you're a member of the party, you have to automatically a member. And I think what's important is that they're a very heterogeneous group, and there are a lot of people that who are also against the third mandate of the president.
A lot of them are against the third mandate of the president.
Some of them are in favor of it.
Yes.
And I think it's important that some of them have been armed by the regime, but it's very, very hard to say how much of them have been armed and how much of them are willing to engage in violence.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of them that are former soldiers or
Yes.
former rebel members.
The fighters in the
but
forest.
they're also very, a lot of them are also very tired of war because they haven't seen the peace that,
Yes, I've been hearing the same
that the
thing.
regime was actually promising them. So for them, actually,
Tired of war and looking for the fruits of peace. Yes.
So it's very hard to say how much of them really are willing to engage in violence, but there is a radical fraction that's very important to watch out. But I think it's important to say that it's very heterogeneous.
Well, another question has come in, which I'll bring forward because it's so relevant to what you've been saying. How do we account for the lack of vision in the opposition, this failure to unify?
It's a very good question. I don't think that I can provide you with a convincing answer. The only thing that I can think of is that the opposition is highly fragmented. It is made up of politicians that are not always seeing eye to eye in basic issues. I mean, you have Rassa on the one hand, Luigi on the other, and many others.
Renee, let me ask, because you were a real expert on this, and Catherine also, are the divisions within the opposition based mainly on personality or the region within Burundi that these leaders come from, would you say?
It's power. It's a
Personal search for power of the leader?
And the problem, and that has been the problem within Burundi, and to not just because of Burundi or anybody else, is that
Yes.
most of the leaders that get into power, other than try to lift up their people,
Yes.
end up lifting up themselves and their families.
There's a personalist.
And a lot of the opposition groups don't have people that are politically savvy or have any specific plans for the future of Burundi.
So does this sound familiar to you? I once asked the desk officer of the U.S. Department of State for Liberia how he accounted for the number of Liberian men who came forward to claim the leadership of Burundi at a certain point. And he said, Frank, the thing you must understand is that every man in Liberia wakes up in the morning, looks into a shaving mirror, and says, I could be the president of Liberia. Is that the sort of thing you're talking
Yeah,
about?
a lot of the people they don't have a plan for the country. And you're right, they had more. But the problem with Burundi is you mentioned there's extreme poverty, and government is the only institution that basically hires people that has money, other than some private businesses. So a lot of the people grow up wanting to work for the government, and there is an incredible amount of corruption and patronage, and that. So everybody who wants to go in there wants to go in there for themselves, not necessarily to do something for the country.
Yeah.
That's why nobody comes up with clear plans of what they're going to do next.
Yes.
And Nkurunziza basically just promised when he did his speech, he promised a high-speed rail. He promised he promises that
to
You know, not even in the States, they're promising him right now.
Yes.
Because he knows that 90% of the people that he's talking to did not get to the sixth grade. So they're all going to say, okay, my life is going to get better. So.
high in the sky.
Exactly.
But this is a high-speed rail to nowhere.
Exactly.
But
Droit dans le mur.
Yes, sir.
Burundi has done a very good job of dividing the opposition. Because we had the Ukona party, we had the FNL, we had different parties, but he's been able to divide them within their groups and creating two different groups of mostly all the parties. Now we have two Ukona, we have two FNLs, we have two almost everything.
No, that's right.
And most of the time, the reason why it happened is because some people were taking a stand against him. And when the Ukona party took a stand against him, what he did, he created another one. And they've been doing that almost even on an international basis because we've been learning that, for example, in Belgium, in Canada, we have Burundian diasporas that were created by the embassy to basically have a voice outside.
Mm-hmm.
We in Montreal, in Canada, have been trying to organize ourselves, and we just realized that there are existing diasporas that were created by the government.
These are diaspora groups in Canada who are now rivals to the old diaspora.
Exactly.
Burundi.
And when we were marching in Ottawa, we made a protest in Ottawa probably 3 weeks ago, and we have people from the other diaspora taking pictures
Yes.
and sending them to the government.
So they act as government agents.
And articles came up with our pictures
Yes.
at because we have barbecues to try to help people
Yes.
who are in jail. And articles came up with our pictures saying that we are doing barbecues on Park and Grignon for crying out loud to fund the insurgency. I'm like, this is like
You have more power than you ever suspected you had.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you're right. They've done and they've used the government. They've used the Interior Ministry because the Interior Ministry is the one that actually decides which party is legitimate to legitimize these other parties. But even before that, our leaders didn't have a really good plan to begin with. So now it's got worse.
What is the position of the Canadian government on that issue?
It opposes a third term. Very clearly, it's made a public statement on that.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to bring down what René said. I totally agree that there has been a division, a strategy of dividing the opposition through creating different branches, which has been especially orchestrated by the Ministry of Interior. But I think it's coming back to what you said, how dividing the opposition is sort of about access to power, about access to employment. I think that the Ministry of Interior is also able to do that because the opposition itself is so divided, so they're themselves benefiting from existing
Patrick, do you
divisions.
agree?
And there are, for example, many people have called for reunification of opposition parties ahead of the elections. It's not going to work except for one party, UPD, which kind of shows that it is possible if there is a will. So I think it just also underscores what people say.
There was a time in the history of Burundi that René has written about with such insights, when the region we came from within Burundi was really crucial to your political alliances and your policies. But Patrick is pointing out there's this very strong personalist dynamic today. Is there no regional dynamic? Should we take that off the table as a factor today? Or is it there below the surface?
It's gone down before it was Burundi and specifically Togo, one part of Burundi.
Yes.
And there's Murangia where most of the Tutsis came from, the people that were in the civil society. But Nkurunziza is from Ngozi and Kayanza area. So it's changed, it's shifted to a point where it's no longer a factor.
His home area is up near the border with Rwanda, correct?
Yes.
So he's particularly sensitive to all the issues we've been talking about with respect to Rwanda as well. He's grown up in a climate. Of course, he was a major leader in the rebel fight.
He has one of the best communication arms in Africa. Like René and his team, and his brother Alain, the head of foreign relations.
Yes.
They're very, very savvy. They understand technology, they understand the region,
Yes.
they speak the language. And if you listen to the government message,
Yes.
you leave thinking, these people are very reasonable. They know
Yes.
what they're talking about. But if you go back and you look at the actions, that's when you're going to see it. So
That's a good note for us to conclude on. Measure the promises against the actions, and in this case, we're hoping for better actions and more constructive promises, perhaps, as well. I want to thank everybody for participating. Those of you who could not be with us in the room today, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions, and thank everybody here. But most of all, I thank Professor René Lemarchand for helping us to understand a little bit better Rwanda on the brink. Thank you very much, and until the next time. I'm sorry? What did I say?
that's next year.
That was an unfortunately appropriate faux pas. Excuse me. Burundi on the brink. Thank you very much.